does the way you look matter, or should it matter? So,
Going controversial.
Don't hate us.
Disclaimer.
Yeah.
Do not watch if you're easily offended.
We're not judgy.
No, not judgy, but
It's
a very
important.
well-known person recently said and got criticised on social media because they wrote a post where they reflected on a well-known conference that upon walking around that conference, they have never seen so much malaredema and overfilled cheeks and redistributed lip filler. Put that in there. No such thing as migration. Tick box.
It's true. Heard that before.
Yeah. Ever. And everyone went ballistic. Who were saying, you can't say that. That's unfair. So here's my thoughts. I don't think it's unfair to some extent. We sit there all the time talking about that that aesthetics shouldn't encroach on functionality, that we should never put ourselves in jeopardy, that we should always practice safely.
Preserve patient anatomy.
Yeah, absolutely. That we should never distort natural anatomy. So if we are distorting our own, then that says a couple of things. One, do we not have an awareness of what natural anatomy is? Two, if it's okay for me, is it okay for my patients? Is that going to make some patients go, well, if they are doing that to themselves, then will they do that to me? And also, I think we have a responsibility to stay hydrated, use our skincare, get off the sunbeds, to be the role model is that we are intending to be.
Otherwise, you'll do as I say, not as I do.
We're a hypocrite. Oh, you shouldn't really be doing this because you're smoking 30 cigarettes a day, you're abusing sunbeds, you don't use any sun cream, you're a baby white queen, blah, blah, blah. But then you're doing exactly the same thing. Is that message going to resonate, or are you going to sound hypocritical? If your patients know, if you're going out and having a cigarette with your patients, is that professional?
No.
Trying to put myself in a patient perspective, I probably wouldn't go to a practitioner that was overfilled and distorted because I would be terrified that that is what I would look like.
Yeah, completely agree.
But then on the flip side, these patients that like to be overfilled and distorted, and we've all seen them, would probably seek out a practitioner that maybe reflects that image more. But yeah, from a patient perspective, I wouldn't. I'd be looking at them thinking, well, I really don't want to look like you, so I'm not going to come to you. So I think image probably does matter. And I think it's really important. I know it's controversial to say, but I do think it's important to portray the right message to our patients and be cautious in what we preach, that we should be practicing the same. We should practice what we preach.
You should be held accountable. I completely agree. I think if you're telling someone that their migration that doesn't exist needs to be gotten rid of, meanwhile you're saying it with really overfilled migrated lips, they're not going to perceive that in the right way. And why would they do that? Because clearly you as the practitioner haven't done that. So I think, it's the same thing. If you're really massively overweight and you're telling somebody to lose weight, why would they take that from you, and why should they take that from you? Because you're being hypocritical. It's completely the point that we're making is you shouldn't look a certain way and tell someone not to look that way.
I think like you've just said, Grace, you should be empowered to do what you want. And I think we should all have freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom to go where we go, and I don't think there should be anything wrong with that. I'm not going to tell someone they should have work done or they shouldn't have work done. And I mean this in the nicest way. I don't really care how other people live their lives.
No.
I only care about the decisions that I make and what that says about me as a person. So I'm not one to judge and go, oh, they're really overfilled or they're underfilled. But I've had patients who've come to me with what I would class as complicated work. Yeah. And they've said, I had one patient once, many moons ago, who had very, 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 very overfilled cheeks. Her natural anatomy was completely, in the words of Steve Harris, alienized. It was probably the worst I've ever seen, and I felt bad. She loved them. They were also rock solid. So in my opinion, the wrong product had been used. Again, that's my opinion. And I'm entitled to it, by the way. You know, that's fine. And what she asked me to do, she travelled a couple of hours away, and she'd asked me to fill her tear trough so that it wouldn't be such a deep dip from where her cheek had protruded. So I explained to her, what you're asking me to do is distort your tear trough to match your distorted cheeks. And she was like, I'm very disappointed that you're not going to do that. But then she wanted me to then dissolve it. And that then brought another can of worms of, do I want to get involved in this? Because I didn't. And I remember being in a real quagmire. I didn't know what to do. And I reached out to a friend of mine, Dr. Carly, and I remember ringing her and saying, I don't know how to deal with this. Like, I've never had someone, when I've said no, literally not, without being rude, not going away. Like, she was determined that I was going to fill this tear trough. She was not having it. She literally turned up at the clinic the week after and was like, you are filling this tear trough. And I was like, I don't know how to deal with this. And I thought, I'm going to have to go up a gear, but confrontation is not the way I would do it. I don't know how. And the best advice I got in the world that I will pass on to all of you was, blame it on your skill. I am not skilled enough to do what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
I think you need a more advanced practitioner to do something as complex as this. Now, is that necessarily is that not just running away, being a scapegoat? Probably is. But what do I want to achieve in that moment? I'm not her therapist. I'm not going to fix that issue. I don't want to get involved in that issue. So my problem is, how do I get out of it without upsetting them, without being rude? And that was my
My question would be, why? Because what you look very natural and
Morticia Adams.
I wouldn't say that you don't have any distorted features. So in my mind, why would she have sought you out as a practitioner?
Perception drift. She didn't see what I was seeing.
Yeah.
I said that to her, and her answer was, but I like what you represent, and I like the fact that you look really natural. That's why I'm coming to you. But she did not see it. There was complete perception drift. She didn't see what I was seeing, and this is where you've got that problem.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a one-off. That's a complete one-off. But I think it's important to stand by that, and I do think we have a responsibility. Imagine if I was overfilled and then I'm being that hypocrite going, I'm not prepared to do that.
Yeah.
Then it would have come the opposite way.
And I think in aesthetics, because we see it every day, that's why people fall quite easily into ending up overfilled.
Yeah.
Because they see it every day and they practice with it every day. And when they're having their fillers done and they have a little bit and then they get used to it. We all know those patients that you do a little bit and then they come back in 3 months and say it's gone. It's not gone. They've just got used to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens in aesthetics, is especially when there's new fillers, new treatments, you're going on training courses and they need a model. How many training courses have we been on? And they say, oh, models dropped out, we need a model. Any of the delegates want to be a model? Or the delegates, some courses are expected to be models. So they're having work done that they actually don't really need, and then they get used to that work.
Yeah.
And then they think it's gone. So they end up having more work done, and you end up in that cycle, and you don't see what you look like in the mirror. And it's hard.
But again, we as practitioners have that responsibility to say no. And if we all did it, if best practice went across the board, we wouldn't have people. They didn't overfill their own faces. Well, some might, but majority didn't they didn't do that to themselves. So, you know, I think, Tim Pearce did a great thing on his socials a couple of years ago where he talked about the difference between aesthetics and body modification and drawing those similarities. I think this is a really complex issue, but I think staying focused and not going off too much of a tangent to what we're talking about is, does it matter what we look like? Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I think I'd say that we're all in agreement to some extent, yeah?
I think, yeah, definitely. Because I think of practitioners as well. I mean, we all do it. I always stare at people's foreheads and like around their eyes and things like that. And I think, oh, just a little bit of anti-wrinkle would be amazing. And I do follow one practitioner specifically, and I do look at them and think, what, like, obviously they don't want that treatment, and that's absolutely fine. But then would I go and see them? Probably not.
Do you know, there's a flip side to that, because do you know, sometimes people navigate to people who are more like themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I know when we did something a while back, I can't remember what it was. It was a blog post, and somebody commented, "Well, that's all right for you three because you three look the way you do."
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, at first we were taken aback and quite like
Judged.
But then we got to be. Then you know, I think I went back, didn't I, and spoke to that particular practitioner and said, I understand why you feel like that, but you shouldn't feel like that, because not one of us have got our businesses to where they are, who are all at, and we're all at different levels in different places. We certainly didn't get there because we straightened our hair.
Yeah.
And I think that's the offensive point.
Yeah.
You know, but also I'll say it doesn't matter what size you are, what colour your hair is. We're not talking about your anatomy. We're talking about the distortion of your anatomy. I don't care if, you know, I am no ballerina, let's be fair. You know, that doesn't mean I'm a bad practitioner. It doesn't mean I'm distorting my anatomy. And I think that's the key. We just want to make that clear. We're not saying that everyone needs to look a size 6 with blonde hair and blue eyes and great curves in all the right places. That is not what we're saying. We're saying we have a responsibility to not harm ourselves. And they are very different things.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Good point, well made.